what I buy becomes my husband's property too. If that's unacceptable, then maybe we should just divorce. Charles, my husband, often tries to take things from me for reasons that seem completely unreasonable. He even attempts to give gifts I bought for my parents to his own parents, just to make himself look good. But that's not how it works. When I confronted him about it, his face turned pale. Before I married Charles, my grandparents had left me a significant gift, a piece of real estate. I thanked them, thinking this would be a future safety net for both me and my husband. But my grandparents, who were always wise and cautious, advised me to keep it a secret, even from Charles. They insisted that I keep the knowledge of my passive income and financial independence to myself. I felt a pang of guilt about hiding this from Charles, but I chose to follow my grandparents' advice. After my grandfather, who cared deeply for me, passed away, I continued my life with Charles. That's when the incident occurred. One day, while checking the account where I managed our living expenses, I noticed that $10,000 had been withdrawn. This account, which I primarily managed, was meant to cover our household costs, using the money Charles contributed. It was a huge sum, and I had no memory of withdrawing it, which meant it had to be Charles. When he came home that evening, I confronted him. Hey, $10,000 is missing from our living expenses account. Do you know anything about that? Yeah, I lent it to my mom. She was in some kind of trouble, he replied casually, confirming that he had indeed given the money to his mother, Lisa. And you didn't think to tell me? I asked, astonished. It's fine. Besides, it's my money that I earned. We have some savings, so it's not a big deal. That amount won't hurt us, he said, brushing it off. If Lisa was in trouble, what could I do? I had to help. But yeah, I probably should have said something. The account was for both of us, and if he had taken the money from a separate account he had before we got married, it would have been fine. But taking such a large sum from our shared account without a word, that was too much. When I cited his selfishness, Charles frowned, clearly irritated. Okay, I'll tell you next time, he muttered, dismissing the issue and quickly heading to the bathroom. I felt a knot in my stomach. He hadn't always been this way. When we first got married, he was attentive and always listened to me. Was this how marriage changed people? A few days later, I had no choice but to visit my in-laws' house to drop off a package that had been mistakenly delivered to us. Oh, Megan, thanks for bringing this over. Why don't you come in for a bit? Lisa said, greeting me warmly. I hadn't planned on staying, but it felt rude to refuse, so I stepped inside for a cup of tea. As I sat in the living room, I noticed some new, luxurious items, high-end cosmetics, glamorous clothes, and various health products. Oh, my wonderful son gave them to me as a gift, Lisa said with pride. I realized then that the $10,000 in our account had been used for these extravagances. Charles had told me Lisa was in need of money, but it seemed she had used it on indulgent purchases instead. I couldn't help but feel uneasy knowing that the money had been spent on luxurious products for my mother-in-law. As I sipped my tea, unable to muster a smile, I noticed the shift in my in-laws' demeanor. Their cheerful expressions faded, replaced by a stern, almost threatening look. My son is such a wonderful boy, always thinking of me and getting me these lovely gifts. But what about you? My mother-in-law asked pointedly. Yes, as his wife, are you treating my son the way he deserves? My father-in-law added, his tone laced with suspicion. There was something unsettling in their voices. We heard that you give him a hard time about the money he spends on me, my mother-in-law continued. That doesn't seem right, does it? It became clear to me then. Charles had painted himself as the victim to his parents, making it seem like I was the unreasonable one for questioning his decision. Their fearful, accusing gazes now made perfect sense. I felt a deep weariness settle over me. I had never imagined being treated so poorly by both my husband and his parents. The constant neglect and lack of respect were taking their toll, and for the first time, I began to seriously consider divorce. I thought that if I divorced Charles, I would return to my parents' house and use my savings from passive income to rebuild their home. The house, a two-story structure built over 30 years ago before my brother was born, had become too spacious and difficult for my parents to manage as they aged. With just the two of them living there now, even the handrails we'd installed for their convenience weren't enough to make it comfortable. A cozy, one-story house would be far more suitable for them. So I immediately called my parents to discuss my plans. Surprisingly, they weren't shocked at all about the potential divorce. Instead, they were thrilled about the idea of rebuilding their home. We're so happy you're thinking of this, my mother said, her voice bright over the phone. Even if we won't be living there for long, it's wonderful knowing it's being done with your income, and you can take over the house afterward. Thank you, my father added. But remember, take it easy and don't overdo it. Their encouraging words lifted my spirits, and I set about planning the rebuild. I was waiting to hear back from the construction company when Charles suddenly confronted me. How dare you use our savings to build a house without telling me anything about it? He shouted as soon as we sat down in the living room. He banged his fists on the table, his face contorted in anger, completely disregarding my feelings. My parents will live in the new house, I replied, trying to stay calm. No, that's not happening. It was built with our joint property, so my parents have just as much right to live there, he insisted, his voice growing louder. Are you seriously planning to cram 4 people into that little one-story house? Shut up and just give me the house, Charles screamed, slamming his fists on the table again. I realized that if he knew about my passive income, his rage would only intensify. But at that moment, I decided it was time to tell him the whole truth. To tell you the truth, I said, steadying my voice, I have passive income. I've actually been saving money from the real estate my grandparents gifted me, I explained. The house is being paid for with that passive income, so I didn't take a penny from our joint funds. Guilt tugged at me for breaking my promise to keep this secret, but Charles's reaction confirmed my grandparents' wisdom. His shoulders tensed, and he began pounding the table even harder. What kind of wife hides the fact that she has her own income? He yelled, his face turning red with anger. You play around with my money while protecting your own, keeping it a secret from me. Watching him lose control, I realized why my grandparents had warned me to keep this hidden. Maybe they had already seen through Charles, knowing what kind of man he truly was. I'll take the house as alimony, he snarled. The house you built as my wife is mine too. I'm the head of this family, and if you disobey me, I'll divorce you. His words filled me with nothing but dismay. How had I lived with this man for so long without realizing his true nature? Initially, I had planned to use my passive income as a safety net, something to rely on if we ever face financial hardship due to illness or job loss. I intended to reveal it when the time was right to help sustain our life together. But now, any desire to share that money with him had vanished. Be my guest, I said coldly as I rose from my seat and walked out of the house, leaving Charles and his demands behind. I couldn't stand being near Charles, so I decided to stay at a business hotel for the night to cool off. I planned to return home the next day with a clearer mind. However, when I walked in the following morning, Charles was waiting for me, a smug, unpleasant grin plastered across his face. As I entered, he approached me, holding a sheet of paper behind his back. With a smirk, he revealed it. It was divorce papers, already filled out. You're lying about that passive income, aren't you? He accused. You made it up to cover the fact that you were actually taking money from our joint account. His accusations were as baseless as ever, and I found it impossible to reason with him. I had been honest with him from the start, and now I saw no point in trying to convince him further. I'm telling the truth. I do have passive income, I reiterated. Here you go again, Charles sneered. I know you can't live without me. He shoved the divorce papers into my hand, still smirking. Let me know when we can move in, he said with a dismissive wave as if it were all a game. I'm going out for a drink. He patted me on the shoulder and walked out, humming cheerfully, completely oblivious to the turmoil he'd caused. In that moment, I saw Charles for who he truly was. He hadn't changed, he had simply hidden his true nature from me all this time. From the beginning, he had looked down on me, never once truly considering my feelings. Without hesitation, I packed my belongings, filled out the divorce papers right then and there, and left the house for good. I decided to move in with my parents temporarily, explaining everything to them. We agreed to stay together until the new house was completed. The next day, I knew my life was finally moving in the right direction. I felt a wave of dismay as I looked at my phone and saw that my call log was filled with missed calls from Charles. Then, as if on cue, my phone rang again. It was him. Reluctantly, I answered, hoping this would be our final conversation. Hello? Hey, he said, his voice laced with impatience. All your stuff is gone, you know. His tone left me puzzled. He was the one who had initiated the divorce, so why was he suddenly panicking when I simply left? Yes, we're getting a divorce, so that's normal, I replied calmly. I won't be coming back, so feel free to use the empty space however you like. There was a brief silence on his end, as if my words were finally sinking in. It seemed he was beginning to grasp the reality of my situation and the fact that I truly had passive income. After a long pause, he spoke again, but this time in a tone so sweet and pleading that it caught me off guard. Hey, he began hesitantly. Could you let my parents live in the new house? I don't care if I have to live with your parents too, please? I was stunned. I've already told you it's a small, one-story house, I reminded him. Please, he persisted. I said I'd surprise my parents with a house. His words left me speechless. How could he even think of giving away a house he didn't own, and to present it as a surprise? It was beyond reckless and utterly absurd. You don't really care about the savings, do you? He added, his voice almost pleading. You have no idea how much I was worrying about the money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Charles was still trying to manipulate me, thinking only of himself and his parents without any regard for the truth or the consequences of his actions. I gave you an allowance, saved for our living expenses, and tried my best to make ends meet, I began, my voice steady, but that has nothing to do with what's happening here. You're careless with money and you leave all the hard work to others while pretending to have everything under control. You plan to present the house to your parents as if you prepared it all by yourself, didn't you? When in reality, I did all of this for my parents. Charles suddenly fell silent, and my frustration only deepened. It was infuriating how he tried to take credit for something he had no part in, using my hard work and intentions to impress his own parents. He was trying to take advantage of my genuine feelings and seize what wasn't his. I won't give you the house I built with all my heart and soul for my parents just so you can show off to yours, I declared, rejecting his plan once and for all. He began to rant even louder. But husbands and wives are supposed to help each other, he protested. I'll tell them you built it, please. We're not a married couple anymore, are we? I replied firmly. We're strangers now. I already filed for divorce. The shock in his voice was evident. You? Already filed it? Why are you so surprised? You're the one who asked for the divorce. I didn't think you would actually leave me, he stammered. Hey, let's start over. Let's talk it out and try to be a good couple this time. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man who had spent our savings on his own mother, threatened me with divorce, and belittled me until the very end. There was no way I would ever consider getting back together with someone like him. No, thank you, I said, my decision unwavering. Please give my regards to your parents. And with that, I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of finality and relief. I ended the call with a bright, resolute click. The following day, my phone was flooded with voicemails and messages from Charles, pleading for reconciliation. He claimed we could still start over, that he loved me, but I was certain his true motive was to access my property and fortune. To sever all ties, I promptly blocked all his contact information, including that of his parents. In the meantime, the house was completed, and my parents and I settled into our new, comfortable home. Life felt rejuvenated. Later, I ran into a mutual friend who knew Charles and shared the news of our divorce. She offered her sympathy and filled me in on recent developments concerning my ex. Charles had abruptly resigned from his job, claiming he no longer needed to work hard because he had acquired real estate. The company was unable to reach him, but he attempted to retract his resignation the next day. His bosses were furious, lecturing him about the trouble his sudden disappearance and incomplete notice had caused. They were particularly incensed that he hadn't considered the impact on his colleagues. Charles tried to fabricate an explanation for his actions, but it quickly became apparent that his divorce and reliance on my income were the real reasons behind his behavior. His lies unraveled, and the company refused to rehire him. It was ironic that Charles, who had once dismissed my passive income as a lie, was now trying to exploit it while parading his ill-gotten gifts to his parents. He never thought about me or our future. Reflecting on this, I felt nothing but relief. I heard that Charles had moved back in with his parents, but they were reportedly harsh with him. He struggled to find a new job due to the circumstances of his departure from his last one. It seemed he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. As for me, I'm thriving. Living in the house I built for my parents, pursuing the job I've always wanted, and enjoying life. My passive income now supports those who genuinely care for me. I feel at peace and content with how things have turned out.